Neuroscientists who study human patients have shown that if you stimulate a part of the motor area to generate a certain behavior, the person will come up with a story about why they had volition to do that action. It can't be certain if we have free will or not, but I think that as you start to see more and more examples like that of situations where clearly their free will did not generate their action, but their brain nevertheless, for consistency, makes up reason that it did. This was shared by James Fitzgerald, group leader at Genelia Research Campus. Adam Capex, a professor and chair of neuroscience program at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory, shared that the hippocampus is long known to store memories and represent space, but recent evidence suggests that it also supports imagination. When this mental simulation mode is on, you can read out what a rat might be imagining from its neural activity. Dr. Adam Hantman, group leader at Yenina Research Center, shares that granule cells, which are one of the simplest cells in the cerebellum, make up over half the neurons in your brain. They are very small and only have 4 dendrites with only have 1 synapse each. This means that granule cells receive only 4 excited bits of information in total, so they must be doing some simple integration, yet they make up half the neurons in your brain, so they must be very important, substrative or something. Professor Javier Medina, Baylor College of Medicine, Houston, shares that people say elephants have the biggest brains and the most number of cells, and the reason is they have a huge, even more disproportionate than humans, amount of granule cells in the cerebellum. I think part of the reason is that elephants have to be able to control their trunks, which are incredibly complex with many different muscles. Dr. Tuan Bui, associate professor in the Department of Biology at the University of Ottawa, shares that the amazing thing with zebrafish and most amphibians and fish is that if you cut the spinal cord and then leave the animal by itself, within at most a week, the whole spinal cord regenerates itself and the fish will just swim away. Dr. Randall Plath, ETH Zurich, shares that the neurons you're born with are mostly the neurons you have when you die. So these cells live with you your entire life. Throughout your lifetime, these brain cells accrue genetic mutations, and in an adult individual, it is thought that the genomes of seemingly all neurons in the brain are unique. In the early days of neuroscience, when scientists discovered that in addition to focusing images, the lens in the eyeball also flips image upside down relative to the world, a big question for a while was, how does your brain flip it right side up again? Why doesn't the world look upside down if it's in your eyeball upside down? Eventually people realized that the brain does not need to flip it upside down again. Once it gets into the brain, you don't really have absolute coordinates anymore. If something is at the bottom of a visual cortex, that doesn't correspond to it actually being low in the world. The brain only cares about relative coordinates now, once you put it into neural space. This was a philosophical breakthrough for neuroscience. The coordinates of the brain were not more untethered from the coordinates of the world than seems intuitive at first. People tend to think of forgetting as being a pathology, but forgetting is adaptive, as it is not good to remember every single thing that has happened to you. There are people that have these amazing episodic memories, but they tend to lose the ability to extract general principles of this memory. They see the trees and not the forest, basically, and so it is not a good thing to remember every single detail. Professor Sheena Yoselin, Neurosciences and Mental Health Program at the Hospital for Sick Children, Sick Kids. There was an experiment in the 60s on the phenomena called split brain, which is a result of the corpus callosum that connects the two hemispheres being severed. In this condition, there are two separate cognitions in the same individual. In this experiment, different pictures are shown to the right and the left parts of the visual field of the patients. When asked what they say, individuals report what they saw in the right part of the visual field, because this information is processed by the left hemisphere, which is associated with speech. If you ask the patient to choose the object they see using their left hand, they will choose the object that was presented at the left part of their visual field, as that information goes to the right hemisphere that controls the left hand. Thus, it seems like there are two different consciousness in the same individual. The term individual means that it cannot be divided, and I find it amazing that one can use modern techniques to answer questions that people asked themselves thousands of years ago. Dr. Alan Rubin, Weizmann Institute of Science. Patients who have a stroke or for some reason suffer damage to the parietal lobe will experience this weird phenomena called hemineglect, where they don't pay attention to the left half of their visual field. For example, maybe they won't shave one half of their face. If you ask them to draw a flower, they only drop the petals on one side. They only eat the food of one half of the plate. The strangest thing about hemineglect is that it affects memory too. In a previous study, they found a unique population of patients who were suffering from hemineglect and had also spent a lot of time in Milan. They asked the patients to imagine themselves standing in the center of a major plaza in Milan facing north and try to recall as many stores and streets around the square as they could, and the patients only remembered stores and streets on the right side. Then they asked them to imagine facing north, south, and they remembered the opposite streets and stores. Based on things we know about visual imagery and memory, this actually makes a decent amount of sense, but it's still super bizarre. We know that visual imagery uses a lot of the same machinery as normal vision. For example, if you're imagining looking at something, it activates your visual cortex in a lot of ways similar to if you are actually looking at something, which makes sense. If you got the machinery, why reinvent the vision wheel? We also now believe that memories are probably arranged in a structured way that takes spatial organization into account. Episodic memories is probably organized in this cognitive map. So the fact that recall had this spatial organization that could be affected by attention now makes more sense. Kim Stackenfield, PhD research scientist, DeepMind. Once upon a time, if you wanted to tell whether somebody had a heart attack, you would do a blood test to look at the ratio of LDH, lactate dehydrogenase AB, in the bloodstream. In most muscle and blood, you have much more of one isoform than the other. The exception is the heart, where the ratio is flipped to support higher levels of metabolism. This signature was something that you'd associate with heart muscle and was detectable in the blood during a heart attack. But it turns out that there is another cell type in which the LDH-AB ratio is flipped, and that's a cortical fast spiking interneuron. These cells are very metabolically active, and they're so specialized that if you look at their metabolic profile, they don't look like neurons. They look like the heart, as they are hugely active all the time. They express a special subunit of the electron transport gene that was previously thought to be only present in the heart. We have studied these interneurons a lot, but not from the perspective of understanding what compromises they have made for metabolic efficiency. We do know that their dysregulation is linked to schizophrenia and auditory hallucinations. They clearly must be very important, as the body is willing to pay such a metabolically expensive cost because what they are doing is so valuable. This was shared by Andrea Hassenstaub, PhD assistant professor in the Coleman Memorial Laboratories in the Department of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery, OHNS, at the University of California, San Francisco. The discovery of place cells in the brain opened up a completely new way of thinking, as it shows there is a physical, tangible reality to cognitive aspects. This is the first evidence that there is material essence of a very abstract cognitive aspect of a brain function, and this to me still remains the most significant scientific discovery in neuroscience to date. Dr. Marco Tripodi, MRC Laboratory of Molecular Biology, LMB. Studying Parkinson's disease really highlights how much implicit regulation of our behavior is core to what feels like normal voluntary behavior. It is straightforward for us to think about how our mind can be wonderfully intact and yet incapable of executing actions, and I think we are comfortable thinking about that in terms of the peripheral nervous system. However, for diseases like Huntington's disease or tic disorders or Parkinson's disease, the idea that there is still so much implicit control over our behavior in central brain structures and so intimately tied into what we think of as explicit voluntary deliberative control over our behavior. If you're hungry and you really want lunch, you'll walk faster to lunch. It doesn't seem like that is core to what voluntary behavior is, but in some respects, I think that capacity to regulate behavior like that is actually core to what voluntary behavior is. In part, that is partially because implicit circuits are doing all of this work that you don't really have to think about. It's doing all of this good regulation of our behavior that sort of makes everything smooth and fluid and sort of well adapted to the environment, but maybe it isn't always worth our explicit deliberation. As far as we can tell, for some 500 million years, we've basically kept the same circuit doing that. The basic ganglia has just scaled essentially linearly with the size of our brain. There has been incredible diversification over the time from this tiny little thing called the pallium, which is the beginnings of the cortex, through the massive neocortex of primates, and yet basal ganglia is there, critical to all of that. This information was shared by Dr. Josh Dudman, group leader at Geneva Research Center. Hi, I hope you're enjoying the videos. I'm not going to beg or persist or force you to subscribe or like the channel, but if you feel the content is worth it, then reward it as such. Thank you so much and have a great day.